Today we're joined by Professor Marc Frincu, an authority in distributed systems, big data, smart grids, astronomy and archaeoastronomy. Marc is also the Secretary of the European Society for Astronomy and Culture and Vice President of the Romanian Society of Cultural Astronomy. Marc guides us into the Armenian Highlands and relives his extraordinary discoveries of Bronze Age archaeoastronomical devices. He discusses the functionality of mysterious spiral and cup-shaped petroglyphs and delineates crumbling stone structures with starburst alignments to surrounding burial sites and mountaintops. We also dive into Yazidi cosmology, and Marc outlines a north to south Bronze Age meridian line, defined by a cone of standing stones framing the circumpolar stars. And seeking meaning, we discuss ancient perceptions of the north sky and how it was perhaps associated with notions of mortality and infinity. Marc, why were you in Colombia and what did you see?
Yeah, it's at the conference actually, and we just took some days off to visit some sites. And I think the first one was near Bogota, and it was called El Infiernito.
Oh, really? In April this year, we had 10 explorers here filming a documentary, and we represent the first team to 3D map and generate point cloud imagery of El Infernito, the little hell. Would you believe that?
Really? That's awesome.
We discovered it was aligned to 91 degrees to Morro Negro, the Black Hill, overlooking Villa de Leyva 5 miles to the east. It's known as Colombia's Stonehenge, which is atrocious. Anyway, what did you make of the site, Marc?
Well, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, the green, and it was so green and so full of standing stones, and I could understand why the Spanish called it like that. It was quite an experience. Usually, and this is also linked to standing stones, but to a different side. I remember I've been once to such a place in a different country in Armenia, and my wife asked the archaeologists there, "What do these represent?" And they had the same meaning as El Infernito, and they all blushed, and they couldn't know what to say, and you know that they were looking at each other, and what should we answer to this woman, you know?
It's called El Infernito because it's essentially a matrix of hundreds of carved phalluses. The Spanish conquistadors associated it with sex, therefore the work of the devil. Diabolic. Hence El Infernito, the little hell. It's not just about the equinox at that site. Perhaps more so it's about the 5th of April on the zenith, when the sun appears directly overhead at midday. It's called the Day of No Shadow. Quite an important day in the cosmology of the culture who used the site, and it was associated with the insemination or the fertilization of the male sun god into the dry and barren terrain of the wanton goddess.
Yeah, that's great.
Where did you come from to Trent College?
Well, I came from Romania. Romania is my original country. I was teaching there, so I've been teaching there for 3 years. We decided to relocate in the middle of the pandemic. That was a big move, actually, finding a flight and all that, and then leaving everything and then going into lockdown. And I've been doing it for 3 years, basically. But in the past 10 to 12 years, we've been traveling a lot. So studying mostly. we've been in California, in LA, in France for a few years, and then 3 years in the UK at Trent. And now we are actually back home in Romania for the time being.
I lived in LA too. What were you doing there?
I studied there for 2 years as a postdoc at USC, a great football team. Well, at least they call it football, but it's not real football. Um,
Top class, Mark. You just offended 70% of the audience. Continue.
But yeah, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, the climate, the LA climate is amazing. It's an eternal spring, and it was one of the best times we've had. I mean, we love hiking and finding sites, and the Southwest in America is extraordinary in terms of ancient sites and pueblos and petroglyphs and all of that. So it was a very rich experience for a few years.
We filmed at the Coomach Indian Reserve in Thousand Oaks, about 18 miles west of LA. The indigenous leader took me to a cave on the reservation and showed me a deep blue carved marlin which he claimed was between 8 and 10,000 years old, Mark.
I mean, we were never taught about any of these. Everything starts at the European colonization. Whatever was before that, it's completely ignored most of the time. And uh, when I actually found about all those sites. I got to see some of them, like the Serpent Mound, and also we've been to Chaco Canyon as well, because there are some archaeoastronomical alignments supposedly there as well. And I found through reading lots of articles. I mean, it wasn't something that anyone told me about. I had to find them for myself, and we've made a point on visiting as many archaeoastronomical sites as we can, and we've been doing that for the past several years around the world, and it's been amazing, especially if you get to see them at those key moments like solstices and equinoxes and all that. That's really cool. It's way more than what we can understand from a scientific perspective. I mean, science has its own point of view, but it's all only one side of the coin, is it? And I was actually amazed, and I immediately thought about it when you were discussing um, that I was catching the solstice sunrise at the Bighorn Medicine Wheel up north a few years back, and there was a day before. I just went there to explore and to prepare myself and to know what to expect the second day. And there was this family. There was this dad with his son, and he was they were Native Americans, and he was explaining his son that this is not a touristic attraction. This is our way of life, and I was so touched by that, and I think I will remember that forever. I still get goosebumps whenever I think about that. So it was a very deep experience.
Mark, wheeling back to the start of that, I can't let it go that you just said I was catching a solstice at the Bighorn Medicine Wheel. Do you know what level of nerd you've got to be to say I was catching a solstice? Bringing the audience directly to the crux of your mind, Mark. I would like you to begin with explaining why you were awarded the Mihail Hermanescu Award for Mathematics and Computer Science. What did you think that nobody until you had thought?
Getting recognized for your own work is really something that it's a unique experience, and it's a moment that forever stays with you.
Yes. Our audience are highbrow, and They like technical, nuanced information. So I'm going to challenge you to explain what you were given the award for specifically.
The award was for my set of publications, but I would say that out of all those publications, there was a single one that stood out. I basically came up with a novel idea about a self-healing platform, software platform, basically, and that result was presented at the top conference. Uh, as far as I know, I was the first Romanian to get to that conference as the first author and with a Romanian affiliation. So that was a big achievement for me, and I would say that counted a lot.
I have to congratulate you for that. And there's a lot of archaeoastronomers, but also astrophysicists and mathematicians are listening to this podcast. We opened the season with Giulio Magli from the University of Milan. And I find that those researchers with mathematical and physics backgrounds make the most impact in archaeoastronomy. Would you agree with that? They seem to have the correct foundations.
I would agree with you on that one. The archaeoastronomy, especially in Europe, is heavily based on methodology and mathematics. I mean, for some time, it was polluted, I would say, with pseudo theories, and for that reason, scientists, astronomers, physicists have tried to come up with a strong, solid methodology because in Europe, compared to the Americas, for instance, there are no written records. We only have the stones, and without proving mathematically, statistically that there is a high probability of intent, uh, astronomical intent. We cannot go forward. So this is why scientists push and have the biggest success, I would say, and credibility.
I find that people who take the soft science approach, the tendency is to fall for the selection effect, whereby they will find alignments or orientations which suit their predetermined notions, whereby the person or the researcher with the physics or mathematical background isn't afraid to waste 6 years looking at all of the data. And I think that's the difference. It's one's ability to interact with big data sets or one's love of hopping to, oh my God, look what I've just found.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of science, I would say, right? I mean, you have to you have to look at all the possibilities. You have to analyze everything from all point of views. But I would say that context is also important. Once you derive the mathematical constructs behind, and you've proven to a certain point your theory, context is really important. I mean, you have to experience, you have to relive the experience of the ancients that have built that to get in, to understand the reasons. Otherwise, it's just a simple mathematical construct, I would say. But it's only part of the story. It's not the entire story.
I totally agree. Context is everything. And would you agree with the fact that when we use Google Earth, mapping programs, 3D software, we're using a digital part of our modern brain. And then when you actually go to that landscape that you've maybe spent a year mapping, it's like you're a stranger on the moon. It doesn't look in any ways familiar. You built a construct that was so abstract that it sometimes shocks you when you get to these sites.
Yeah, I agree. It's when you do remote sensing, and you do remote exploration, you're detached, and when you get there, you actually feel what what's there, what's out there. You feel you feel the sunlight, you feel the moonlight, you feel the stars, you feel you kind of get, you know, teleported back, and you get the chance to actually feel.
Totally.
uh, I remember one time I was again chasing the summer solstice, and I got the hour wrong, uh, by 1 hour, the time wrong, and I went up the mountain. It was 2,200 meters. June is still pretty cold, and I basically froze for an extra hour, and I was praying for that first beam of light to warm me up. And if you know, you just need to think about all those people back 1,000, 2,000 years without electricity, without heat, without all these modern commodities, waiting in cold for a sunrise.
I'm so with you, Mark. Like, in a day to day context, I get up at about 5, an hour before the sun here in the Andes, and I get on with watering my plants and doing the garden. And see, when the sun comes up, it doesn't matter if it's the solstice or not. When that sun comes up and you see it coming through the trees, you feel the cold air starting to rise. It's as close to a spiritual moment that you can get in our modern world without in any ways going woo or new age on this. It truly is an otherworldly, deeply thought provoking, esoteric time of the day when that sun comes, and equally when it goes, when you know it's going to drop 10 degrees within half an hour. What I'd like you to do is to explain the highs and lows, the most pleasurable and the most grueling aspects of your two expeditions to the Sevsar mountain in 217 and 219.
Well, it started as a holiday.
Just catching a solstice, were you?
And it was a holiday. We were looking to explore a new country, and looking for strange sights. And we found this amazing company. It was a startup by some Armenian students, and they were offering these tours that were not offered by big companies in strange places. And we handpicked. I told them I want to go to all these strange sites, and let's see them. And that's how it started. And it was basically visiting a lot of sites. And while visiting those sites, of course, I had my measurement instruments with me, and I was constantly taking measurements, orientations.
Mark, stop. I've got to ask you, what tools did you have? What did you have?
Well, I'm usually using compasses and clinometers like the Sun 2. It's enough for a first analysis. And also, let's remember that those people back then didn't have a theodolite, and they didn't have accurate measurements, and most of the alignments were probably ritualistic, so they didn't need an exact alignment like the Giza pyramids or whatever. And I was taking measurements, and uh, back at the hotel I was analyzing the data before going to bed and all that. And uh, I I actually, it wasn't Sevsar the first discovery that I made there. It was another mountain, Murad Sar. Sar is mountain in Armenian, so Mount Murad. And archaeoastronomy in Armenia is still in its infancy, and it's less known. There are some sites that get a lot of publicity, but they're not really archaeoastronomical. And all those findings, I published my first paper on Armenian Highlands. It was a nice calendar, and we actually discovered a stone idol there. My wife discovered it, and she was really impressed. I mean, look, this is a sculpted idol from who knows when, and I found it, and it was really an amazing point. And um, we discovered this calendar up in the mountains, and that's when the story began.
Before we talk about the artifacts that you came across, I'd like you to paint a picture of the kind of terrain, because I can't summons a picture of the Armenian Highlands. I couldn't tell you if it was desert, volcanic, or forested. What is it?
It's highlands. It's like the Andes, and it's volcanic.
Mm.
There are no forests. It's the lower parts, as you go down towards Iran and Azerbaijan. It's a little bit semi-arid, uh, but mostly it's highlands and highland, volcanic in nature.
And is there agriculture? What I'm trying to drive at is, were these sites visited for ritualistic purposes, or did they serve as community centres?
It's mostly pastoral, so it's mostly shepherds, and there is a community called Yazidi, and they are different to Armenians and all the others, and they live in the highlands. They do a lot of shepherding, and most of the sites were probably used in that context, ritualistically, somehow. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot information about those sites, uh, and there is a nice mix. Actually, I mean, you can find sites from. We found there cemeteries, Muslim cemeteries, Christian cemeteries, houses, cairns, and all that. I mean, everything is bundled together. I mean, it's clearly these are sites that have been populated since long ago, by various people, and they're still used today.
Lots of indigenous monumental landscapes have central mountains from which and to which chief alignments are drawn, suggesting the mountain itself is a target rather than the sun or the moon, if you like. Are there any Yazidi or any other indigenous oral accounts relating to the cosmological significance of the mountains there, or any one mountain in particular?
This is actually what we discovered with our Murad calendar, that some of the mountain peaks were actually targeted, because they were aligning. The sun was setting or rising behind them, or from behind them, and unfortunately, the communities that we talked to couldn't tell us more. They do know about the stones, the petroglyphs, and all that, but their memory doesn't go back that far to actually tell us something useful.
Yeah.
But the sites, the place is huge. I mean, surely there is some community somewhere that knows something, but it requires an extensive study to say.
Wonderful. So now we have a background on the environment and the cultures that inhabit it today. One by one, we'll work through the things you've discovered. So I'd like to ask you to focus on your discovery of the cup mark in the largest circular petroglyph. I'd like you to talk about that and your association with a lunisolar calendar.
Yes, so that was we visited Sevsar. Sevsar means Black Mountain, actually, because it's volcanic. So Sev is black, and Sar is mountain. And we actually visited that place during our first time there. And when during our second visit, I had the time to actually take some measurements. And what's nice about that place, and I was there with one of the archaeologists, Levin, and he was also intrigued by the fact that that petroglyph on that specific rock is completely isolated. It's on the mountain slope, and there is no site, no Bronze Age site, because they assume it's late Bronze Age. So late Bronze Age is probably 3,000, 3,500 years old. They believe that because the closest sites are Bronze Age. But the site itself is isolated. I mean, there is no permanent location, no permanent settlement. They're far away, and it's in the winter. You've got 2-3 meters of snow up there.
What you're doing here is saying because it's isolated, it's hard to get to, it's remote, that the location itself, that's what's been monumentalized. Is that what you're going to say here?
Yeah, exactly.
So how did that thing function? Explain. I can't wait to hear.
After taking the measurements, it came to me that it had several concentric circles and a lot of cup marks around the circles, and one big cup mark in the middle. And my first thought was, whoa, big cup mark in the middle, concentric circles. This is a historic sundial.
Stop. Contextualize this. Is it on the vertical or the horizontal?
It's on the horizontal.
Continue.
So what I did, because there are three major concentric circles, uh, and because the sun throughout the year reaches two extremities at the solstices. At the winter solstice, you have the shortest shadow of a vertical stick of the gnomon, and at the winter solstice you have the longest shadow, and then midway you've got the what we know as equinoxes, but obviously they didn't know about the equinoxes because it's a Greek concept. uh, but what I did, I measured the distance from the cup mark to each of the concentric circles or rings or whatever you want to call it, and they fit.
Okay.
They approximately fit the length of the shadows at those moments.
So functionally, it's a horizontal version of the shadow dagger in the Chaco Canyon.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Before we move on, I have to come back and cross you or check on something. You just referred to the equinoxes as a Greek concept. You need to explain that out because the sun rising at the equal points of the horizon has been happening a lot longer than Greek astronomers have been talking about it. So what were you driving at there?
Well, they could be contextualized, and the mid circle does indeed fall close to the equinox time, but the concept of equinox is a mathematical concept, and it's something. It has to do with the declination of the sun, and when the sun is exactly on the celestial equator, which is a projection of the Earth's equator, and that only happens in an instant, and it's not always at sunrise, and it's a mathematical construct basically.
I get what you're saying. So looking at that another way, what you're saying is the sun only does something twice that you can see, which is the northern and the southernmost rising and setting points at the solstices. But the equinox, there's nothing actually to see there. So you're saying it wasn't monumentalized as such in Armenia, but the two solstices were. Yeah?
uh, Probably yes. Probably yes.
Probably.
Uh,
Go into that probably.
Yes, because I mean the mid circle is close to the shadow, halfway between the solstices. So that could have been used as an approximation of the equinox. The problem with the equinox is that at equinoxes, the speed of the sunrise on the horizon. So the sun rises from different points on the horizon each day. Uh, it has the speed from one day to the next around the equinoxes is large enough that if you miss the exact day, you're off in your calculations. So you have to be very precise, especially and this works nicely if you have a flat horizon. In Armenia, you've got mountains and all that, and you can easily miss that mid, that center moment, that moment in between the solstices. But there are other ways to approximate that, maybe taking the half the days after the summer, and counting the days, half the days, dividing the days.
The cross quarter days.
Exactly. Yeah, you can do that. Uh, but what's really fascinating at that particular site is the fact that it can encode this information, and if it's indeed a sundial, or a form of sundial, it's and if it does come from the Bronze Age, it will probably be one of the earliest forms of sundials that we have.
Okay, if you're suggesting it's a sundial, like every sundial, it must require a gnomon. Have you considered what perhaps was used as a gnomon? And I suppose the length of that gnomon was hugely important for the shadow casting aspect. Yeah or no?
Yeah, yeah, yes, that's correct. And there is a large cup mark in the center of the rings, and it's deep enough to sustain a vertical pole. So if that's correct, and we actually plan on testing that. So we are planning on going back there and actually, producing a stick of the right size, and put it there at the solstices, for instance, summer solstice, and test to see if the shadow really follows our assumptions.
Wonderful idea. And in addition to that, for about $400, you could get yourself a webcam with a solar battery and you could photograph it every morning and night for a year and see what the actual shadow does over the year. Because while it perhaps marks the two solstices, goodness only knows what else it might mark in the extended landscape beyond the two solstices.
Yes, that's correct. That's totally correct, and that's a very good idea. And in addition to that, we are also planning to 3D scan it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because if we get an accurate 3D model, we can play with it in astronomical tools like Stellarium, for instance, which is nice for simulating this phenomena, and then we can do all those tests in different scenarios, and at different times, because one problem that we have is that we do these live experiments with the sun as it is today, but the coordinates and the position of the sun and the obliquity of the ecliptic changed, and changes constantly. So the rising points, the extremes of the sun change slowly, but they do change. And the more you go back in time, the bigger the change.
It is about the width of the sun itself of a difference since the Bronze Age.
Yes, yeah.
There's a nuance that's in my head I have to ask you about. So if you think this is a calendar in front of you on a horizontal plane, and you have a gnomon, I would imagine in the real world with a gnomon or a staff or a post, it would be very difficult to take shadow measurements from either the rising or the setting of the winter or summer solstice sun, because the trees could grow on a horizon, a mountain might collapse on a horizon, and things change. Is there any evidence there of meridionality? Wouldn't they have had to have taken the measure as the sun crossed its meridian? Is that clear?
Yes, and it's exactly what happened, or what we believe it happened.
Is it?
Yes, because what we measured is actually the length of the shadow at zenith, at the meridian. So at noon, if you wish.
Yeah, on its meridian, culminating on the meridian at noon. Excellent. So there's a consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're going to go and try and prove that. That's what you need to do is take a so put a nomen in. But wouldn't you? No, wait, Mark, you'd need to use nomens of various lengths. How could you ever guess the right nomen length? Wouldn't it be the length of the nomen that you're going to have to try and test?
Well, to get to the length of the shadow, we had to know the length, the height of the gnomon. So we actually know the height.
Oh, what is it? Come on, this is your holy grail. I'm asking you for that magic number. Because essentially that's a cosmological constant in the culture that built it, isn't it? That set measurement.
Yes, it is in the article that we published. To be honest, it's I don't remember the exact value. So, but it is in the article. Yes.
Have you seen any whole number integers or multiplications or divisions of that staff length in surrounding archaeology or monumental landscapes to suggest it was an important standard measure or not?
No, we haven't, because what makes this site unique, it's its design. Most of the sites in Armenia are full of petroglyphs. So we have carved rocks, and we have some megalithic alignments, rows, stone rows, but nothing like that. So it stands unique in the Armenian landscape for this reason.
Has the device been tested against the cycles of the moon?
No, we haven't tested it. It's an interesting idea. Uh, Obviously, the lunastice and well, the lunar standstills are do not overlap with the solstices, for instance. The major standstills are outside of the solstice, and we have the minor standstills. We only found three concentric rings, but that doesn't mean that the cup marks that are outside the most outer ring, or the cup marks between the rings, don't mean anything. They could be related.
Okay. You know, every system that's ever been designed fails when a man's hand gets involved. So I would imagine there would have been some kind of tripod structure there. But moving outwards from the actual device, have you identified archaeology on the horizons where the sun is seen rising or setting on either of the two solstices to mark those spots on the horizon?
That's one of the first things that we consider when we do archaeoastronomy high in the mountains, because you have all those mountain peaks that could play a role. But in this case, that was not an important factor, as far as we have discovered. There are other sites, like the one that I was mentioning, Muradsar, that does align, and the mountain peaks play a role, but not for this one.
You're not describing a monumentalized landscape. What you seem to be describing is an abandoned, now remote, archaeoastronomical device from the Bronze Age. But what I don't have a picture of is the type of people who might have used that. What were they wearing? What were they eating? How were they living? Could you possibly paint a picture around this abandoned Bronze Age device?
Well, they've actually discovered some of the oldest wine um, in the world in the area. So people were definitely enjoying some good wine. And there have been stories of workers there that have tried the wine and it wasn't that good for them because it's not good to drink solidified 3,000-year-old wine. Don't do that at home. And so they were farming. Um, they were shepherds, definitely. I mean, this is definitely something that hasn't happened only recently.
Mark, what was the climate like? What was the environment like? Was it warm or cold or?
The mountains in Armenia are quite cold, and it usually rains in the afternoon. So, especially in the summer, if you go there in June, July, August, you'll definitely need a raincoat. It always rains. It's windy, and you get snow definitely.
That's what I'm driving at, Mark. What did the winter solstice represent to these people? Did it represent the death and rebirth of light? But do you think it was associated with death in the culture that built that device?
It could have been, but there is one big problem with the winter solstice on the device. The device seems to record the winter solstice, but given that the device is probably under 2 meters of snow at that time,
Ah,
it's hardly that they were capable of being there and witnessing that. So this is what makes the whole thing strange, in my opinion, is that it's a device that seems to show these key moments,
yeah.
but you can only witness the summer solstice because in the winter you cannot get there. It's impossible.
Dr. Robert Weiner was explaining that the ceremonial roads in the Chaco Canyon, similarly to many sacred sites in the Americas, would switch on and off depending on weather and climate during the year, whereby some sites may have been filled with water and they served a reflective purpose at some time of the year, and then they were completely dry and abandoned at other times of the year. And what you've just done is described a perfect example of that, where it was a seasonally affected site, which must have played a huge role in their locating of this one-off device. Would you agree?
It could be that there are certainly other examples in the area,
Okay.
not restricted to Armenia itself, but there are sites that have a really, strange. It's a strange choice for locating the site. It can be in swampy areas where you don't usually go. They're there. It's swampy. How do you get there? Especially in winter, for instance, there are sites that align with the winter solstice, and they're in the middle of uh, you know uh, swamps, and it's wetland, and getting there and just to witness the winter solstice seems really awkward, to say the least.
You're almost telling me there that this calendrical device was perhaps not functional, that it was a logo of a culture, that it was maybe something that represented them. How do you know it wasn't purely symbolic and that it actually functioned as a calendar if you say they're in places that would be kind of hard to use as a calendrical device?
uh yeah, that's really interesting, and it could be. I mean, we do have other examples in history, like the famous Antikythera mechanism that encodes all the ancient knowledge. And without, I mean, without going into details, it could be something similar that we could have an example of a site that was used to encode some sort of a knowledge for something. It could have been something ritualistic, something that happens in the summer and turns off for the winter. You cannot access it. It could have been used to teach someone something, because we do have the Shadowlands. It could have been used as a school device, for instance. There are many possibilities for that.
Has any material archaeology been discovered with crisscross lines, maybe cross-hatching or lozenges, or evidence for cardinality or meridionality being at the center of that culture? What's been discovered, Marc?
There are lots of examples high in the mountains. Rock art, carved rock art with crosses, swastikas, zigzags, spirals, and all those symbols that indicate a sense of direction, and are usually in some cultures associated with cardinality and the passing of the time. And you know very well the spiral in Chaco Canyon, for instance, the solstices, the sun daggers, and it's here as well. And there have been also some artifacts. I believe they're from gold or bronze. I'm not sure, and they have been interpreted by other researchers as depicting some sort of um, calendar or solar system, if you wish.
I ask everybody the same question once during an interview. I just love a meridian. I love an ancient meridian. 8 years ago, I published my proposition of the first dynastic prime meridian in the Khmer landscapes of Cambodia. And since then, I've been completely obsessed with meridionality. And the question is, can you define or describe a meridian anywhere in the region you're talking about? Have you seen a line of stones, a line of mounds at all? Meridians. Do you have one?
Yes.
Ooh!
I actually have a really nice example for you that you would love,
Go on.
and it's indirectly a meridian line, because the meridian is not marked by a stone row. The stone rows actually mark the circumpolar stars, the circumpolar region.
1 second, 1 second. I'm going to have to ask you, how does a row represent something that's circling in the sky? Go for it.
It's like a triangle. Without one of the you know
Sides.
yes, so it's like a V, and that V points to the extremes of the circumpolar stars.
So it's maybe from the tail of Ursua Major to the tail of Draconis.
Yes.
Oh, that is just incredible, really. So that's an artifact of a love and reverence of the North as a concept in its totality, isn't it?
Exactly, yes, and the bisecting angle, actually, if the V is precise, the bisecting angle should be your meridian, should point north.
In the Bronze Age, that would have been, Kochab would have been close to that. 3000 BC, it was Thuban. And in the Bronze Age, there was nothing that was actually on the meridian, but you're right. They would have been pointing to that invisible celestial zero in the sky. Polaris being there, it's changed cosmology hugely, because when you have a marker there, that means there's a material item in the sky at your key point. Can you imagine looking up at night and hearing your grandfather's tales about that black void of nothingness that was not spinning round, that was being spun around. That's just so different from having Polaris theory.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I've actually haven't thought about that in this way. But there is also something interesting about this circumpolar area of stars that never set, and it seems to have uh,
Oh, yeah.
caught the attention of ancient people. There is something about stars always being there, and infinity and immortality. And I'm thinking right now. You just put darkness and blackness in the image, and I'm trying to figure out. You have these stars that are constantly there, spinning. They never set,
Almost serving the center.
serving the center. Exactly. Exactly.
What might that have represented for people on a mountain in Bronze Age Armenia?
Yeah. And combine that with the fact that you've got some of the largest uh, tumuli ever discovered in Armenia, tens of meters in diameter, in the middle of the V, so inside the V shaped structure. So you've got some very rich people that were destined to live forever in the afterlife, probably.
It's a reflection of the pyramid builders of Egypt, whereby they aligned their channels in the pyramids to the northern stars in the belief that their souls resided in the north. But then the ancient Egyptians, they had Thuban, just less than a degree off the pole, so they had what we have today, but not in the Bronze Age. It was an unpopulated black spot in the cosmological north, which is the absolute opposite of what the sun is in its meridian in the south. The south being where the sun is and the light, and its transposed contemporary in the north being just a hellish place of darkness, if you think about it.
Exactly.
Great stuff. I'm delighted we got to the meridian question. I have to ask you to go over to the Murabar site because I believe it was you actually discovered or measured architecture rather than focusing on a calendrical device or a petroglyph. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So most of the Armenian highlands are full of sheep enclosures. So basically, circular rock structures that host animals or keep them inside. What was interesting about this structure and what caught my attention was the fact that it had some rays, and it had rays going out of the structure.
In what form were they? Stone linements? Were they?
It was basically some stone rows uh, towards the northeast and southeast, so basically covering the sunrise arc. And on this circular structure there were these rock piles in certain places, and there were also some smaller uh, arcs of stone that were didn't have any practical use for, let's say, holding an animal inside. They were too small to hold an animal, and they didn't have any practical use. And
But hold on, I can't let you skip past that. Are you saying you discovered piles of stones that hadn't been moved since the Bronze Age?
I wouldn't say that because there is no way to know that. But we did find what appeared to be at least one uh, stone idol carved. It has nice round eyes, and the shape of the head. You can see the chin nicely carved, and it was placed in the north part of the circle, inside the circle, basically. So by taking measurements and the orientation of the rays going out of the circular structure, and also the sunrise and sunset points with respect mountains, we actually discovered that it was a structure connected with it had some calendrical purpose, basically.
Have you inspected the landscapes between the structure and the mountaintops?
Yes, there is, definitely is. There are currents there, lots of them, and some of the rays point towards the mountain peaks as well. So they do point to some, let's say, funerary sites or distant mountain peaks.
You've really then discovered a geoglyph.
Yes, yeah, I would say that. I never called it like that, but yes, you're correct.
You're describing what Dr. Charles Stanich, who's legend in the Peruvian landscapes, he described the Paracas culture's mounds, and some of the researchers there call them sun rays or sunbursts. And it's just what you said. It's a central mound or a circular site, and from it are rays, but he described much more than the axis of the solstices. Some of them might have cosmological value, some of them might link or associate different regions or territories. One of the alignments he described was 17 kilometers. Wait for it. No deviations, straight as the eye can see. Do you see any long distance ceremonial or trade routes in the Armenian mountains?
We do have the Silk trade route that passed through that region. We don't know how far back in time it goes, but probably it goes hundreds of years. So it could be linked. It could be linked.
Where can the audience follow your work, find out more about your plans for going and testing that cylindrical device?
Well, I've got my YouTube channel, and I also have my page starscapeexperiences.space. Usually, I post all the stuff and the exploration I'm doing there. So that's a good place to start.
We'd love to have you back on once you've done some more work in these areas and once you've had to think about what the North might represent without a star in the middle to get in the way. I'd love to talk to you about that again after we've both had a bit of time to think about that.
Definitely, that's something to think about. Yes.
Thanks again, Marc.
Thank you, Ashley, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure being here and a great opportunity. Yeah, looking forward to chatting with you again, definitely.